The cargo bay door exploded inward, and the first wave of Velthari soldiers came through fast and hard, expecting to overwhelm a single wounded human in seconds. The first soldier hit the lubricant-slicked floor, and his feet went out from under him, and he crashed down with 200 pounds of armor, slamming against the metal deck. The second soldier tripped over the first, and Mara was already moving. She had killed the lights in the first third of the cargo bay, and the Velthari relied heavily on their infrared vision to fight in darkness. But Mara had spent the last 5 minutes pressing her body against a coolant pipe to lower her thermal signature. She was a ghost in the dark, a cold shadow that moved between the crates and struck without warning. Her blade found the gap in the third soldier's neck armor, and he went down, choking. She took his shock lance as he fell, and used it to jam the weapon of the fourth soldier, and then she hit him in the sensory pits under his jaw with the heel of her palm, and he screamed and stumbled backward into his squadmates. The narrow passages she had created with the shifted crates did exactly what she needed them to do. They turned the Velthari's numbers from an advantage into a liability. The soldiers could not spread out, could not flank, could not use their superior size. They were forced to come at her one or two at a time through corridors barely wide enough for their armored shoulders. And in a narrow corridor, against one or two opponents, Mara was something terrible. She fought with everything she had, and everything she had was not pretty. A blade in one hand, a stolen shock lance in the other, and a lifetime of training that had taught her exactly where alien bodies were weakest. She targeted joints and nerve clusters and the soft tissue under the jaw. She used the crates as cover and the darkness as a weapon, and every time the Velthari thought they had her pinned, she slipped away and hit them from a distance. Different angle. A soldier caught her with a backhand that lifted her off the ground and threw her into a stack of containers. She hit the metal and felt something in her left shoulder pop, and the pain was so intense that her vision whited out for a full second. She hit the ground and lay there. 1 second passed. The Velthari soldier who had hit her turned away, already dismissing her because she was down and broken things stayed down. Mara got up. She got up with a dislocated shoulder and cracked ribs, and blood running from a cut above her eye. And she picked up her blade from the floor with her right hand, because her left arm was hanging useless, and she kept fighting. The soldier turned back and saw her standing, and something happened in his face, something that looked almost like fear, but was deeper than fear. It was the recognition of something that should not exist. A creature that violated the fundamental rules of how the universe worked. Things that were broken were supposed to stay down. That was the law. That was how nature operated. This human had not read the law. Mara put the blade through the gap in his shoulder armor, and he went down bellowing. She fought until she could not count anymore, until the cargo bay was a maze of groaning, wounded soldiers and scattered weapons, and the floor was slick with alien blood that smelled like copper and ammonia. She fought until her body was a single continuous note of pain that she could not separate into individual injuries, because everything hurt equally. A stun round hit her in the back of her right thigh, and her leg buckled, and she went down on one knee. She pulled the barb out with her teeth and stood back up on a leg that felt like it was made of static and broken glass. A Velthari soldier watched her rip the stun barb out with her mouth, and he turned to his squadmate, and his voice was barely a whisper. "What is she?" "Many. Even for a honey badger, 20 was too many." Mara was driven back step by step through the cargo bay until she was standing in front of the crate where Pip was hidden. She had her blade in her right hand, and her left arm was useless, and her leg was barely holding her weight, and she was bleeding from so many places that she had stopped keeping track. The surviving soldiers formed a semicircle around her, weapons raised, keeping their distance, because even now, even broken and bleeding and barely standing, they did not want to be the next one to get close. Commander Tyrakai walked through the cargo bay door. He was tall even for a Velthari, nearly 8 feet of scaled muscle and cold authority. He wore ceremonial armor over his tactical gear, and his amber eyes swept the cargo bay with an expression that moved from confidence to confusion to something very close to disbelief. His soldiers, his elite tactical team, more than half of them were on the ground. One human had done this. He walked forward slowly until he was standing in front of Mara, looking down at her the way a mountain looks at a stone. She was kneeling now because her leg had finally given out. One arm curled protectively behind her toward the crate where Pip was hidden, the other holding her blade out in front of her with a grip that did not waver. Blood on her face, blood on her hands, blood soaking through her shirt on the left side, where her ribs had finally shifted enough to cut something inside. And still those brown eyes looking up at him, calm, patient, absolutely unbroken. Tirakai studied her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice held something that had not been there before, something that was almost respect. "Why?" he asked. "She is not your offspring. She is not your kin. She is not your mate's child. She is not of your clan, or your tribe, or your bloodline. Why do you do this?" Mara looked up at him, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. Voice was raw and rough and steady. "Because she is a kid, that is it. That is the whole reason." Tirakai's eyes narrowed. He could not understand this. It did not fit any framework he possessed. The Velthari protected their own blood, their own lineage, their own genetic legacy. That was rational. That was logical. Dying for a stranger's child was something that existed outside his ability to understand. "You are going to die here," he said. "For a child that is not yours. For a species that will forget your name. You understand this?" Mara smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a hero's smile. It was the smile of a honey badger looking at a lion and deciding that today was a good day to be unreasonable. "I understand that you are still talking," she said, "instead of fighting. And I think that means you are afraid of what happens when you try to go through me, even like this. And I think you should be." Tirakai raised his weapon, shuddered. The lights flickered. The floor vibrated with a deep resonant hum that traveled through the metal bones of Korath Station like a heartbeat. Emergency alerts flashed across every screen in the cargo bay, and a sound cut through the air that made every Velthari soldier freeze. A human voice, broadcasting on every channel, on every frequency, on every speaker in the station, crisp and military and carrying the kind of authority that crossed species boundaries. "This is Captain Chen of the United Nations ship Persistence to Korath Station Command. We have arrived, and we are aware of the situation. You are holding human civilians, including children, under armed guard. You have 60 seconds to stand down and release all hostages, or we will begin boarding operations." A pause. Then Chen's voice again, and this time there was something in it that was not professional, something that was personal and cold and promised consequences. "Marines, a P. The UNS Persistence had not arrived in 4 hours. It had not arrived in 3.5. Captain Chen had pushed the engines past their safety limits, past their rated maximums, past the point where the engineering crew had warned her that the drive core could destabilize. She had done it anyway, because there were children on that station, because that was what humans did. They persisted. Tirakai stood frozen. The weapon in his hand was still raised, but his eyes had moved to the ceiling, where the sound of docking clamps engaging echoed through the station like thunder. A human frigate was locking onto Korath Station, and inside it were 200 Marines who had spent the last 3 hours in transit, getting very, very angry. He looked down at Mara. Mara looked up at him, and she smiled again. That same smile, the honey badger's smile, the smile that said, "I did not need to win, I just needed to not stop." "I told you," she said, "I just had to not." Tirakai lowered his weapon. He stepped back. He gave the order to stand down, and as his soldiers filed out of the cargo bay, they gave Mara a wide berth. The way you walk around a downed power line, not because it is large, but because you have learned what it can do. Mara waited until the last soldier was gone. Then she let go of her blade, and it clattered to the floor. She let herself fall sideways, and she lay on the cold metal deck and stared at the ceiling and breathed. Behind the crate, Pip uncurled herself and crawled out. She saw Mara lying on the floor and ran to her and knelt beside her, putting her small hands on Mara's face. "Mara," she said, and she was crying again. "Mara, are you okay?" Mara looked up at that small tear-streaked face. She did something she had not done in a very long time. She laughed. "Kid," she said, "I am a honey badger, I told you. We do not, okay." The Marines found them like that 7 minutes later. A 7-year-old girl, sitting on the floor of a destroyed cargo bay, holding the head of a bleeding woman in her lap, and telling her very seriously about her favorite colors, while the woman laughed and winced and laughed again. The aftermath was swift and merciless. The Velthari operation collapsed within hours. Captain Chen presented Commander Tirakai with a formal diplomatic protest that was backed by the implicit threat of a human fleet and the explicit threat of economic sanctions that would cripple the Velthari trade networks. The galactic community watched and took notes and updated their assessments. Tirakai was recalled to the Velthari homeworld in disgrace. His career was over. His name became a cautionary tale, a warning to every Velthari officer who thought that mammals were beneath notice. The human presence on Korath Station doubled within a year. Not because humans demanded it, but because no one dared object. The story of the honey badger spread through the station, and then through the sector, and then through the galaxy, carried by traders and merchants and information brokers, who told it in bars and markets and meeting rooms. Mara was offered a medal by the United Nations Space Command. She declined. She took a new contract instead, permanent security escort for all human families on Korath Station. The pay was modest, the hours were long. She did not care. Pip's parents found her in the station medical bay 3 days later, with her ribs wrapped and her shoulder in a sling, and her feet up on a chair, reading a technical manual about Velthari station architecture. They tried to thank her. They tried to express what it meant that a stranger had nearly died for their daughter. Mara shrugged with her one good shoulder and said, "It is what I do." Duct, the Grellian information broker, updated his species database one final time. He opened the entry for Homo sapiens and deleted everything he had written before, and replaced it with a single word under the threat assessment category: relentless. And in the classified archives of the Velthari High Command, a xenobiologist who had studied the footage from Korath Station wrote a report that was immediately sealed at the highest security level. The final paragraph read as follows: Recommendation: do not engage humans in prolonged conflict. Do not threaten their young. Do not corner them. They do not behave as their size suggests. When pressed, they do not calculate odds. They simply refuse to stop. This is not bravery as we understand the concept. It is not madness as we define the term. It is something else entirely. It is something that is built into the very architecture of their species. 3 million years of evolution designed to produce one outcome: survival at any cost. What we witnessed on Korath Station was not an aberration. It was not one exceptional individual. It was a demonstration of what humans are at their core, and what they are at their core is the single most persistent organism the galaxy has ever produced. Do not test this again. We will not survive the lesson twice. The report was filed and sealed, and the Velthari never touched a human child again. And on Korath Station in the Arboretum on Level 6, a little girl with her hair in 2 puffs chased bioluminescent insects through the gardens, and laughed, and asked every alien she met what their favorite color was. And a woman with a scar on her face and a new scar on her ribs watched from a bench nearby, with her hands loose at her sides, and her brown eyes moving in a pattern that never stopped. Mara found a maintenance hub on level 4, a small room full of pipes and junction boxes, and the constant hum of the station's life support systems. It was not comfortable, and it was not safe, but it was hidden, and right now, hidden was the best she could offer. She sat Pip down on a thermal insulation panel and told her to stay quiet. Then she went to work on herself. Field medicine was not pretty. Mara had learned it in the Marines, where the philosophy was simple. If you are still breathing, you can still fight. She pulled her shirt up and looked at her left side, and what she saw was not encouraging. The skin was already dark purple and swollen. When she pressed gently, she felt the grinding shift of broken ribs moving against each other. 3 cracked, 2 on the left, 1 on the right, where she had hit the wall. She taped them with adhesive strips from the small medical kit she always carried, wrapping the tape tight around her torso to keep the bones from moving. Shifting. She swallowed 2 painkillers dry and gave herself 30 seconds to let the worst of the chemical taste leave her mouth. Then, she pulled her shirt down and moved on. Pip watched all of this with the enormous eyes of a child who was learning things about the world that no 7-year-old should have to learn. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Yes," Mara said, because she did not lie to children. "Then why are you not crying?" Mara thought about it. "Because I have things to do, and crying would slow me down. I will cry later when it is safe, maybe. My mom says it is okay to cry." "Your mom is right. It is okay. But right now, I need my eyes clear. Okay?" Pip nodded. Mara found a hardline terminal in the maintenance hub, a direct connection to the station's internal network that bypassed the jammed wireless communications. She plugged in her comm unit and sent a coded ping to Duct. He answered in seconds. "You are alive," Duct said. The relief in his clicking voice was real. "I heard about the incident in Sector 7. The Velthari are furious. You injured 4 of their soldiers, Mara, 4. They were between me and a kid. How is the human quarter?" "Locked down. Tarakai has sealed the residential section and is holding the diplomatic staff under armed guard. The children in the quarter are contained but unharmed for now. He is using them as leverage to force the xenobiology team to hand over their research data." And the Perseverance. "Still 4 hours out. Maybe 3.5 if they push their engines. Captain Chen confirmed receipt of the distress signal. They are coming as fast as they can." 3.5 hours. Mara closed her eyes for a moment and did the math in her head. She was wounded and slow, and she had 1 child with her, and the entire Velthari security apparatus was about to come looking for the human woman who had embarrassed their soldiers. "Tarakai is sending a full tactical team after you," Duct said, as if reading her thoughts. 20 soldiers, heavy armor, sensor equipment. He wants you found, and he wants the child recovered, and he wants it done before your navy arrives." 20, Mara said quietly. 20, is that a problem? "It is a number, Duct. Numbers are just math." She paused. "Keep me updated on their positions if you can." "I will do what I can. Be careful, Honey Badger." "Careful is for people who have options." She cut the connection and turned back to Pip. The girl was sitting exactly where Mara had left her, with her knees pulled up to her chest and her arms wrapped around them, looking very small in the blue-gray light of the maintenance hub. Mara sat down next to her, and for a moment they just breathed together in the hum of the machines. "I want my mom," Pip said. "I know," Mara said, "and you are going to see her, I promise. But right now, I need you to be brave for a little while longer." "Do that." Pip nodded, but her lip was trembling again. "Let me tell you something," Mara said, and she shifted so she was facing the girl, and her voice took on the tone of someone sharing a secret. "Do you know what a honey badger is?" Pip shook her head. "It is an animal from Earth, from Africa where my family comes from. It is small, not much bigger than a house cat. It has short legs and thick skin, and it is not pretty, and it is not fast, but it is the most fearless animal on the entire planet." "Fearless," Pip said. "Fearless. Lions are afraid of honey badgers, Pip. Lions, a lion is 100 times bigger than a honey badger. But when a honey badger walks toward a lion, the lion backs away. Do you know why? Pip shook her head again, but her eyes were wide now with curiosity instead of fear. Because the honey badger does not care how big the lion is. The honey badger does not do math. The honey badger does not look at a lion and think, that thing is bigger than me, so I should run. The honey badger looks at a lion and thinks, I am a honey badger, and I do not run. That is just how it is built. Is that why they call you that? That is why they call me that. And let me tell you something else about humans. Because we are the same. We are not the biggest things in the galaxy. We are not the fastest or the strongest. The aliens out there, they look at us and they see soft skin and no claws and no armor, and they think we are weak. But they are wrong. Mara leaned forward, and her brown eyes were warm and fierce at the same time. Humans are the most stubborn thing the universe ever made. A long time ago on Earth, our ancestors were small and weak, surrounded by predators that were bigger and faster and stronger. And do you know what they did? They did not hide. They did not give up. They ran those predators down. They chased them across the plains for hours and hours and hours, until the bigger, faster, stronger animal collapsed from exhaustion. Exhaustion, because it could not keep going. But the human could. The human always kept going. That is called persistence, Mara said. And it is our superpower. It is not claws or fangs or armor. It is the simple fact that we do not stop. We get knocked down and we get back up. We get hurt and we keep moving. We look at something bigger than us and we say, no, I am not done yet. Pip was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, is that what you're doing right now? That is exactly what I am doing right now. The next 3 hours were the longest of Mara's life. She moved through the station's maintenance tunnels with Pip on her back, the girl's arms wrapped around her neck and her face pressed into Mara's shoulder. Every step sent a bolt of pain through her broken ribs, and she filed that pain away in a place where it could not reach the part of her brain that made decisions. Commander Tyrakai's tactical team was good. They had sensor equipment that could track heat, signatures, through walls, and they had the station's internal cameras, and they had 20 trained soldiers who knew the layout of Korath almost as well as Mara did. Almost. Mara had spent months learning the forgotten parts of the station. The dead zones, where cameras had broken and never been fixed. The junctions where heat pipes created thermal noise that masked a body's signature. The old cargo routes that had been sealed off and forgotten. She moved through these spaces like a ghost. When the tactical team got close, she fought back not with weapons, but with the environment. She vented coolant into a corridor behind her, and the sudden cloud of cold gas blinded the Velthari infrared sensors, and turned the hallway into a fog of confusion. She rigged a maintenance drone to emit a heat signature similar to a human body, and sent it down a corridor in the opposite direction, and smiled grimly when she heard the tactical team chase after it. When one soldier got too close, was waiting in the dark behind a support column, and she hit him once in the throat, and took his comm unit, and disappeared before his partner could react. She told Pip stories as they moved, whispered them into the girl's ear as she carried her through dark tunnels and narrow crawl spaces. Stories about earth animals, about the persistence of wolves, and the cleverness of crows, and the absolute unreasonable courage of honey badgers. And slowly the hours passed. 1 hour gone, 2 hours gone. At the start of the 3rd hour, Tyrakai's team cornered them. Mara had made a mistake. She had turned into a corridor that she thought was clear, and found it sealed at the far end, a new barrier that had not been there a week ago. She turned back and saw the tactical team entering from the other end. 20 Velthari soldiers, in full armor, with weapons raised and sensor lights cutting through the dim air. She backed up until she found the cargo bay, a large storage room filled with stacked crates and heavy equipment. She carried Pip inside and set her down behind the biggest crate she could find. "Stay here," she told the girl. "Do not move, do not make a sound." "Mara," Pip whispered, and her voice was tiny. "I am going to be right here," Mara said. "I am not going anywhere, I promise." She stood up and looked at the cargo bay and began to work. She had maybe 5 minutes before they breached the door. She spent those 5 minutes turning the room into something that would give her every possible advantage. She shifted crates to create narrow passages that would force the soldiers to approach single file. She disabled half the overhead lights, creating pools of darkness between islands of light. She found a container of industrial lubricant and spread it across the floor near the main entrance. Then she stood in the center of the cargo bay with her one remaining blade in her hand, and her broken ribs grinding and blood dried on her chin. Waited. The intercom crackled. "Human." Commander Tyrakai's voice was deep and cold, and carried the absolute confidence of a creature who had never been seriously challenged. "You are one mammal. You are injured. Surrender the child, and you may live." Mara reached up and keyed the intercom, and when she spoke, her voice was as steady as a heartbeat. The squad leader gave the order with a flick of his clawed hand. 2 soldiers moved toward Mara from either side, their shock lances crackling with blue-white energy. They moved with the trained confidence of warriors who had subdued hundreds of creatures larger and more dangerous than this one small mammal. They were not prepared for what happened next. Mara did not wait for them to reach her. She exploded forward with a burst of speed that covered the gap in less than a second. And the first thing she did was bring her wrist up and spray a concentrated stream of capsaicin directly into the face of the soldier on her left. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Velthari had sensory pits along their jaws, heat-sensing organs that were exquisitely sensitive and had never, in their entire evolutionary history, encountered anything like capsaicin. The compound hit those pits like liquid fire, and the soldier dropped his weapon, fell to his knees, and began screaming. In a register so high that it hurt human ears, his claws raked at his own face, and he thrashed on the floor like a creature being burned alive. The other 6 soldiers froze, not for long, just for a heartbeat, just for that one fraction of a second where the brain tries to process something it has never seen before, where the trained response crashes into the unknown and stalls like an engine choking on bad fuel. Mara used that heartbeat the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, with absolute precision. She dropped low under the swing of the second soldier and drove one of her carbon blades into the gap between his knee armor and his shin guard. The blade went in clean, and the soldier buckled, and Mara was already moving past him, already inside the circle, already between the soldiers and Pip. The squad leader barked an order, and the remaining 5 closed in. What followed was not beautiful. It was not elegant, or cinematic, or anything like the fights and stories, where the hero dances through enemies with grace and style. Mara fought the way humans fight when they are cornered, and protecting something they cannot afford to lose. She fought dirty and fast and mean. She grabbed a shock lance from the fallen soldier and used it as a lever to throw a third Velthari off balance, then slammed the butt of it into his throat, where the scales were thinnest. He went down gagging, and she was already spinning to face the next one. A massive tail whipped out of nowhere and caught her across the ribs. The impact was like being hit by a car. Mara felt 2 of her ribs crack, and the pain was a white-hot explosion that filled her chest and stole her breath. She hit the wall and slid down, and for 1 second, the world went gray at the edges. 1 second, then she was up. The Velthari soldier who had hit her stared, because in his experience when you broke a creature's bones, that creature stayed down. It was a simple equation in the predator mathematics. That governed his species. Damage equals submission. Pain equals retreat. Mara was not following the equation. She came off the wall with blood on her teeth, and drove her second blade into the gap under his arm, where the armor did not cover. The soldier roared and swung at her, and she ducked the blow and punched the blade deeper and twisted, and the soldier went down with a sound like a building collapsing. 4 down, 3 standing. The remaining soldiers pulled back, and for the first time Mara saw something in their amber eyes that she recognized. It was not fear exactly. Velthari did not process fear the way mammals did. But it was confusion and uncertainty, and a deep biological alarm that was screaming at them that something was fundamentally wrong with this situation. They were bigger than her, they were stronger, they were armored and armed and trained, and there were 3 of them and 1 of her, and she had broken ribs and blood running down her chin. Was still standing between them and the child, and she was still looking at them with those flat brown eyes that held no rage and no desperation and no plea for mercy, just a calm, terrible patience that said, "I can do this all day." The squad leader spoke into his comm. "Requesting immediate reinforcement. Sector 7. We have a hostile human combatant. Request tactical support." He did not say that the hostile combatant was a single woman who weighed less than his leg armor. He did not need to. The tone of his voice said everything. The 3 remaining soldiers grabbed their wounded and pulled back down the corridor, keeping their weapons trained on Mara as they retreated. They moved the way prey animals move when they are leaving the territory of something dangerous, backing away slowly, never turning their backs. Mara watched them go, and only when they were out of sight did she let herself feel the pain. It hit her like a wave. Cracked ribs, maybe 3, not 2. Left side was a solid mass of fire, and every breath felt like someone was pushing broken glass into her lungs. She had a cut on her forearm that was bleeding freely, and her right shoulder was already swelling from where she had impacted the wall. She did not have time for any of it. She turned to Pip. The little girl still had her hands over her ears, and her eyes squeezed shut, and she was trembling so hard that her whole body vibrated like a plucked string. Mara knelt down in front of her, ignoring the scream of protest from her ribs, and gently pulled the child's hands away from her ears. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, Pip, you can open your eyes." Pip opened her eyes. They were red and wet and enormous. "Are they gone?" she whispered. "They are gone for now," Mara said. "But we need to move, okay? We need to go somewhere safe. Can you walk?" Pip nodded, her lip trembling. "Good girl." Mara stood up, and the movement cost her something she would pay for. Later, she held out her hand, and Pip took it with both of hers, wrapping her small fingers around Mara's scarred palm. They moved. She led Pip away from the corridor junction and into the maintenance tunnels that ran through the station like veins through a body. Mara knew these tunnels better than most because she had spent her first month on Korath mapping every access point and every junction and every forgotten corner where a person could hide. Behind them, she could hear the squad leader's voice echoing through the corridor, calling for reinforcements, calling for a full tactical response, and she knew that what had just happened was only the beginning. Pip was half running to keep up with Mara's pace, and after 2 minutes, she tugged on Mara's hand. "Are you a soldier?" the girl asked in a small, breathless voice. Mara glanced down at her. Something like that. "Are we going to be okay?" Mara thought about the 23 children in the human quarter, and the jammed communications, and the 4-hour wait for rescue. She thought about Commander Tyrakai and his tactical teams, and the fact that she was one wounded woman with a pistol, 2 blades, and a can of pepper spray in a station full of enemies. "Kid," she said, "I am a honey badger. We do not, okay." Pip did not understand what that meant, but something in the way Mara said it made her stop trembling. 3 levels below them, in the belly of the station, Duct was having a very busy evening. The Grellian information broker had made a career out of knowing when to sell secrets and when to give them away for free. Right now, he was giving them away as fast as his 6 limbs could type. He was sending messages to every merchant guild, every independent trader, and every neutral faction on Korath Station. and the message was simple. The Velthari have attacked a human child. The response was immediate and electric, not because the galaxy particularly loved humans, but because the galaxy understood economics. Humans were the most prolific traders, the most inventive engineers, and the most aggressively profitable species to do business with. If the Velthari were willing to use human children as hostages, then no species' children were safe, and that was bad for business. But Duct also sent the message for another reason, a personal one. He had studied humans. He had read their history and watched their behavior, and cataloged their responses to threat. And he had come to a conclusion that he now typed into his private species database. He opened the entry for Homo sapiens and scrolled to the threat assessment section, which currently read, moderate, physically fragile, but tactically unpredictable. He deleted it and typed a new entry, do not touch their young. Every species in the galaxy knows this, except apparently the Velthari. When a human stands between you and their child, they are no longer calculating odds, longer a rational actor. They become something else entirely, something that 3 million years of evolution built for exactly this moment. They become the thing that does not stop. He saved the entry and went back to sending messages. 4 hours. Mara had to keep one child alive for 4 hours on a station that was hunting them both. She had fought worse odds. She had survived worse situations. She had been broken and beaten and left for dead more times than she could count. And every single time, she had gotten back up because that was what she was. That was what humans were, the species that got back up. Mara moved through the mid-levels of Korath Station like a woman who had done this before. Because she had. She had survived 3 hostile stations, 2 pirate raids, and 1 full-scale evacuation on a colony world where the atmosphere processors failed and everyone had 12 minutes to reach the shelters. She had learned that panic was a luxury, and speed without direction was just noise. She needed information before she needed weapons. Duct operated out of a storage closet on level 9 that he had converted into what he called an office and what everyone else called a nest. The Grellian information broker was a creature about 4 feet tall, with 6 limbs covered in fine brown chitin and compound eyes that reflected light like wet glass. He survived on Korath Station by knowing everything about everyone and selling that knowledge to whoever paid the most. Mara banged on his door 3 times with the flat of her palm. The door slid open, and Duct peered up at her with all 6 eyes rotating independently, which meant he was either frightened or excited or both. "Honey Badger," he said in his clicking, rasping voice, "I was about to contact you." "Talk fast," Mara said. Duct pulled her inside and sealed the door. His nest was a chaos of screens and wires and data chips, stacked in towers that defied gravity. He scrambled up onto his work platform and pulled up a holographic display of the station. "Velthari security forces are mobilizing," he said, and his upper limbs were twitching the way they did when he was nervous. 3 full squads moving toward the human residential quarter. They are calling it a containment drill, but Mara, I have been on this station for 11 years, and I have never seen a containment drill that required shock weapons and tactical armor. "Comms to the human quarter are jammed," Mara said. "Yes, jammed from the central communications hub, which means this is coming from Commander Tyrakai himself. He has authorization from someone high up, very high up." "What do they want?" Duct made a sound that was the Grellian equivalent of a bitter laugh. "The human xenobiology team has been mapping Velthari genetic structures for the cultural exchange. Your scientists have data that the Velthari High Command does not want shared. Data about biological vulnerabilities and weaknesses in their species that they have kept secret for centuries. They want that data back, and they want leverage to make sure your people hand it over quietly." "The children," Mara said. "The children," Duct confirmed. Mara stood still for a moment, and Duct watched her with the careful attention of a creature who had survived by reading predators. His species had a classification system for dangerous animals based on how they behaved when threatened. Most predators fell into categories that made sense. They got bigger. They got louder. They showed their teeth. Opposite. When a human became truly dangerous, they got quieter. They got stiller. Their faces stopped moving, and their eyes went flat. And something behind those eyes started calculating with a cold efficiency that Duct found absolutely terrifying. Mara was doing that right now. "How long until outside help arrives?" she asked. Duct checked his screens. The nearest human vessel is the UNS Persistence, a naval frigate currently on patrol 3 systems away. If they received a distress signal, it would take them approximately 4 hours to reach Korath. "Has a signal been sent?" "I sent one myself through a back channel 12 minutes ago." "You are welcome." Mara looked at him, and something in her expression softened just a fraction. "Thank you, Duct." "Do not thank me," the Grellian said. "I am doing this because humans are extremely profitable trading partners, and I would prefer you all stay alive. Also, your species frightens me in a way that I find perversely reassuring." Mara almost smiled. Then she turned to business. She needed weapons, but not the kind that a Velthari soldier would expect. She went to a supply cache she kept hidden in a maintenance panel on level 8. Every experienced security escort on Korath kept hidden supplies, because the station was the kind of place where being prepared was the difference between breathing and not breathing. She pulled out her kit, a compact kinetic pistol that fired hardened ceramic rounds capable of cracking Velthari armor at close range. 2 short blades made of a carbon composite that never dulled. A set of flash charges that could blind any species relying on visual light. And her special project. Mara had spent 3 months developing a chemical deterrent based on capsaicin, the compound that made earth peppers hot. Most humans found capsaicin painful, but manageable. For alien species whose sensory organs had never encountered anything like it, the effect was catastrophic. She had tested a diluted version on a Velthari merchant who had tried to rob her, and the alien had collapsed, screaming and clawing at his face for 15 minutes. The concentrated version was in a small spray canister that fit in her palm. She armed herself quickly and efficiently, strapping the blades to her thighs, the pistol to her hip, and the capsaicin spray to her wrist. She checked each weapon the way a musician checks their instrument, by feel and by instinct. Then she moved. The Arboretum was on level 6, a large open space filled with plants from dozens of worlds, where the station residents could pretend they were not trapped inside a metal cylinder in the void. It was where the children played, and it was the most likely place for the Velthari to begin collecting their hostages. Mara took the maintenance corridors to avoid the main routes, where Velthari patrols would be moving. She crawled through access tunnels designed for creatures with different body shapes, and she squeezed through gaps that would have stopped anything larger than a human. She was halfway to the Arboretum when she heard it, a child crying. The sound came from a corridor junction ahead, a place where 3 hallways met under harsh white lights. Mara slowed her pace and pressed herself against the wall and looked around the corner. 7 Velthari soldiers stood in a circle. Their armor was dark and tactical, and they carried shock lances that hummed with a low electric whine. They were tall and broad, and their scales caught the light like wet stone, and they were all looking down at something in the center of their formation. Pip. The little girl was standing in the middle of the circle of soldiers. Her hair was in its 2 familiar puffs, and she was wearing a yellow shirt with a cartoon alien on it. And she was crying the way children cry when they are terrified, but trying to be brave. Her small hands were balled into fists at her. Sides and tears were running down her cheeks, and she was looking up at creatures that were 4 times her size, with the wide, shaking eyes of a child who had just learned that the universe was not safe. One of the soldiers spoke into a comm device on his wrist. "We have a human juvenile, Sector 7 Corridor Junction. Begin Phase 2. The squad leader looked down at Pip, with an expression that was not cruel exactly, but utterly indifferent, the way a predator looks at something too small to be worth eating, but useful as bait. Pip sobbed, and the sound echoed down the empty corridor. And then the corridor was not empty. Footsteps, slow and steady and unhurried, coming from the shadows of the maintenance corridor. One set of boots on metal plating, with a rhythm that was almost casual, almost relaxed. Mara stepped into the light. She did not rush. She did not crouch or take cover or reach for a weapon. She simply walked forward and stopped about 10 feet from the circle of soldiers. And she looked at them the way a woman looks at a math problem she has already solved in her head. 7 armored Velthari soldiers, each one capable of tearing a human apart with their bare claws. One 5'6" human woman, with cracked ribs from a bar fight last week, and a scar on her face, and absolutely nothing in her expression that resembled fear. The nearest soldier saw her, and his grip on his shock lance shifted. Just slightly, just enough to show that something about this small mammal, standing in the open without any visible concern, had triggered an alarm in a part of his brain that was older than language. Mara looked past the soldiers at Pip. "Hey, kid," she said, and her voice was calm and warm and completely at odds with the situation. "I need you to close your eyes and cover your ears for me. Can you do that?" Pip looked at her with wet, desperate eyes and nodded, and put her small hands over her ears and squeezed her. Eyes shut. Mara looked at the squad leader. "I need you to understand something," she said, and her voice dropped to something low and even and terribly patient. "I am not going to threaten you. I am not going to negotiate. I am going to tell you what is about to happen. You are going to step away from that child. If you do not, I am going to go through every single one of you. Not around, through. And I want you to know that I am not even going to be angry about it. This is just what I do." One of the soldiers laughed. The squad leader did not laugh. He was looking at Mara the way a creature looks at something it cannot classify. And deep in his cold reptilian brain, a signal was firing that said, "This is wrong. This small thing should be running, and it is not running, and that means something terrible is about to happen." Korath Station hung in the black void like a metal city wrapped around itself, spinning slowly near the pale green glow of a gas giant that had no name worth remembering. The station was old and enormous, and filled with species from every corner of the galaxy, and it smelled like engine grease and alien spices, and the kind of tension that comes when too many different creatures are forced to share the same air. Mara Okonkwo walked through the lower markets, with her hands loose at her sides, and her eyes moving in a pattern that never stopped. She was not tall. She was not wide. She stood about 5 feet and 6 inches in her boots, and weighed maybe 140 pounds soaking wet. And she moved through a crowd of aliens that towered over her like trees over a stone. But no one bumped into her. No one stepped into her path. The crowd parted around her the way water parts around a rock in a river, and not a single creature in that market could have told you why they moved. Just did. She had a scar that ran from her left eyebrow down to her jaw, a thin white line that her dark skin wore like a quiet warning. Her hair was cut close to her skull. Her eyes were brown and steady, and carried the kind of calm that made certain species deeply uncomfortable. Not the calm of someone who was relaxed, but the calm of someone who had already decided what she would do if things went wrong. The aliens called her the Honey Badger. She had earned that name on a station called Verith Prime 2 years ago, when a Kasori raiding party had tried to take a human cargo ship. She had been the only security escort on board, and the Kasori had sent 9 warriors to seize the bridge. Mara had put all 9 of them on the ground in under 4 minutes, using a fire extinguisher, a dining fork, and what the Kasori later described in their official report as an absolutely unreasonable amount of aggression from a creature that small. After that, the name stuck. Her job was simple. She had walked a human trade delegate named Harmon through the lower markets to a meeting point. kept him safe from pickpockets and predators, and the occasional drunk Velthari who thought it was funny to shove mammals. And now she was done. She collected her payment through a station credit terminal and considered what to do with her evening. The answer, as usual, was to find a bar and sit with her back to a wall and watch the room. Korak's station was run by the Velthari, a tall reptilian species with scales the color of wet slate and eyes like cracked amber. They stood about 7 feet on average, and they moved with the slow, confident grace of creatures who had been the apex predators on their homeworld for 60 million years. They had built an empire across 40 star systems, and they looked at mammals the way a crocodile looks at a mouse, something small and warm, and ultimately beneath notice. Humans had arrived on the galactic stage only 30 years ago, and the Velthari had not been impressed. They tolerated the human presence on Korath because human trade goods were profitable, and human engineers were annoyingly good at fixing things. But tolerance was not respect. Respect was something the Velthari reserved for species that could look them in the eye, and most humans had to look up. Mara did not mind looking up. She had learned a long time ago that the direction of your eyes mattered less than what was behind them. She found a bar on level 12 called the Rust Pit, which was exactly as welcoming as it sounded. The seats were built for creatures twice her size, so she sat on the edge of one, with her boots dangling, and ordered something that the menu promised was safe for human consumption. The drink arrived in a glass the size of her head, and tasted like gasoline mixed with lemon, but it was cold, and she had nowhere else to be. The bar was full of the usual mix: Grellian traders with their 6 limbs folded neatly as they counted credits, a pair of Torvathi miners with stone-gray skin and hands like shovels, and a table of Velthari soldiers in light armor drinking something that steamed. Mara watched the Velthari soldiers the way she watched everything, without appearing to watch at all. She had learned their language. 2 years on stations, controlled by their empire, had given her enough fluency to follow conversations, and the Velthari never expected a mammal to understand them. It was one of the many small advantages that Mara collected the way other people collected souvenirs. The soldiers were talking loudly, the way soldiers talk when they are nervous and pretending not to be. One of them, a young one with pale green scales, was saying something about new orders and a timeline. Another one told him to shut up, but not before Mara caught a phrase that made her set down her drink very carefully. Collect the small ones first. She did not react. Her face did not change. Did not shift. She simply set the glass down and let the words move through her mind the way a computer processes data, sorting and connecting and building a picture. The small ones. On Korath Station there were exactly 23 human children living in the residential quarter near the Arboretum. They were the sons and daughters of diplomats and researchers and engineers, families who had come to Korath as part of a cultural exchange program that was supposed to show the galaxy that humans could be good neighbors. One of those children was a 7-year-old girl named Pip, whose parents were xenobiologists studying Velthari ecology. Mara had seen her twice in the Arboretum, a small brown-skinned girl with her hair in 2 puffs and a laugh that could be heard 3 corridors away. She chased bioluminescent insects through the gardens and asked every alien she met what their favorite color was. And she had absolutely no idea that half the station considered her species to be only slightly above vermin. Mara left 3 credits on the bar for the tip. She stood up and walked out, and if anyone had been watching her closely, they would have noticed that something had changed in the way she moved. Not faster exactly, but sharper, like a blade being drawn from a sheath so slowly that no one hears the sound until the edge catches the light. She pulled up her comm unit and tried to reach the human diplomatic office in the residential quarter. Static. She tried again. Nothing but dead air and a faint electronic hum that told her the signal was not failing on its own. Someone was jamming it. Mara stopped in the corridor and stood very still for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, she made a series of decisions that would have taken most people an hour. She mapped the station layout in her head. She counted the weapons she was carrying. She calculated the distance to the human quarter and the distance to the arboretum, where the children played, and she decided which one she could reach first. Then she started walking, not running, walking with the kind of steady, ground-eating pace that humans had evolved over 3 million years on the African savanna. The pace that had once let her ancestors chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. The pace that said, "I am not in a hurry, because I do not need to be, because I will get there, and I will not stop until I do."